Hi students, and welcome to another video in the HSC chemistry series within the acidic environment topic. We looked in the last video at a little brief history of ideas about acids and bases, and we're just going to carry that on in this particular video. When we left the last video, we were looking at some of the limitations of the Arrhenius model, and one of the main ones is that this particular reaction doesn't quite fit the previous definitions of acids and bases. Whilst hydrochloric acid certainly does liberate hydrogen ions in solution, the NH3 one does not. There's no H minus ions coming from here. So how do we explain what happens when these two substances react with one another? So what we have instead is a definition that really consolidates a lot of what we already know about acids, and we've been talking about the fact that acids donate or at least liberate a proton in solution. This proton is a hydrogen ion, and it's basically what's left of a hydrogen atom after an electron is removed. So the majority of hydrogen is hydrogen 1, which is just one proton in the nucleus, and so once the electron's gone, that's all we have left. Most of the time, of course, we now know that this is actually carried around in the solution by water molecules in the form of the hydronium ion. And this is really one of the key ideas. What we want to try and make sure that we're aware of is that this particular definition, which is called the Bronsted-Lowry definition, and you can see this is actually not a hyphenated name, but two people who independently came up with this definition for acids and bases, Johann Bronsted and Thomas Lowry. And the important thing about it is that what we need to understand is that acids are proton donors and bases are proton acceptors. Now, when we've been looking at our production of galvanic cells, we were looking there very much at electrons and the transfer of electrons. So we had oil rig to tell us that oxidation is loss and reduction is gain. And in this case, it was electrons that we were really focusing on being exchanged from one species to another. The important thing now is we're talking about protons. Now we're talking about protons being exchanged from one species to another. And the species that donates the proton or gives it away is the acid, and the species that takes it in or accepts it is the base. Now this allows us to expand our definition or our range of reactions that can be classified as acid-base reactions. So this is an interesting one when we look at the reaction between hydrochloric acid and ammonia. Now in the gaseous form, obviously hydrochloric acid doesn't exist as an acid because it doesn't liberate any ions. So in the gaseous form, it's simply hydrogen chloride. Ammonia then is a gas. If you put these two very close to each other, the gas forms a salt. And that salt is ammonium chloride. But what we notice about this particular salt is that what has actually happened is the HCl has donated a proton to the NH3, with the result that the HCl becomes a Cl- ion and the NH3 becomes an NH4+ ion. Now this exchanging of a proton or proton donation and proton acceptance is a critically important one for our future definition of acids, and everything that we look at in these next few videos and for the next couple of weeks leading up to your exams is going to focus very much on this Bronsted-Lowry definition of acids and bases. So then the key thing about our Bronsted-Lowry acid and base definitions is that acids are proton donors. Now this doesn't conflict with anything that we've looked at before. All it tells us is that when we start looking at what happens to acidic substances in water is that the H+ is going to be donated to the water, and that's going to leave a Cl- ion behind and an H3O+ ion. So this is what we've looked at before, but now we're simply identifying that the fact that this H+ ion is actually what is happening, that it is being donated from one species to another. A base is a proton acceptor, and again we can show that with something like sodium hydroxide, allowing for the fact, of course, that in this case, we need to be aware of the fact that it's the OH minus ions that are the keys here. So if we were to look at something like an acid-base reaction, HCl, the key things that are going to happen here that we've looked at in the past is that we have a salt forming, obviously in aqueous solution, and water. But in actual fact, what's happening? What's happening is that the OH minus ion here, which is in the solution, is actually going to be accepting a proton from that HCl, and so it's going to leave behind a Cl minus ion and form that H2O, that water molecule. And of course, the Na plus ion is also going to remain in the solution. Now, what it means too is that we can start to identify different types of substances on the basis of what they're doing in a solution. This particular substance, which is called a bicarbonate ion or a hydrogen carbonate ion, is behaving in a certain way with water. Can we determine what's actually happening? We can determine what's happening by looking at the H plus ion and what's happening to it. So let's look at this species here and see what's happened to it over here. And what we find has happened to it is that the hydrogen has been lost. It has been donated to the water molecule. And so that leaves this substance behind, and obviously will form the hydronium ion as a consequence. So a Bronsted-Lowry acid definition starts to allow us this opportunity to start identifying what types of substances are behaving in certain ways when they're in solution. So in the last video, you had one slide which gave you a nice little overview of the definition of acids and bases and some of the limitations of those other models. So it's important now that we update that with our final model that we're going to look at, which is Bronsted-Lowry acids are proton donors and Bronsted-Lowry bases are proton acceptors. And we'll build on this a little more in future videos. Thanks for watching.